change in the fundraising sector has never been greater. But innovations in technology are evolving faster than our ability to understand them. Are these advances good or bad? Do they have unintended consequences? And what is the application to the global fundraising sector? That's what we're here to find out. Welcome to the Fundraising AI Podcast, your up-to-date resource for responsible AI for the global fundraising community, hosted by Nathan Chappell and Scott Rosenkrantz.
All right. You're all making us really jealous right now with your food. Smells so good. We're going to sit there. Yeah, just keep a bite. Each of you just keep a bite for us and we'll go around and eat that off your plate. Really great to be here. This is truly an experiment, and this totally fails. We'll blame Pam for this idea. How many here heard of fundraising.ai as an organization? There's some eager hands. Not that many of you. Some of you have. So Scott Rosenkrantz and I worked together in AI since 2017. We were driving in Colorado, visiting a hospital actually at the time. And I thought, AI is inevitable, but how we use it is not. And what if we start kind of a volunteer organization called fundraising.ai and basically provide content and put it out in the world for free? And that was
around 2020. It took a couple of years to get it up and running.
2020, bought the URL, got it going. Right after ChatGPT came out, we actually were at AFP Icon and hosted a breakfast. We thought a few people, it's now known as the famous beignet and coffee breakfast, where we thought a few people would show up and like 80 people showed up. And there was this palpable kind of sense, and we'd worked in AI since 2017, and there was never a palpable sense of this going to be changing everything. And then all of a sudden these people came and they're like, someone needs to do something about this. And so we decided to put on a virtual summit, just to bring in thought leaders from around the space and around the world. And we thought maybe 500 people would show up.
Yeah.
And we had 5,000 people show up. The next year we had 7,500 people show up, and last year we had 12,000 people show up. So we have about 27,000 people from 110 countries participate in this entirely volunteer-led thing that is part of our full-time volunteer jobs. So we both have full-time jobs, and so this is on top. And it's been an amazing experiment and exercise to bring nonprofits together, to learn from each other, to think about, definitely not to evangelize for AI. You'll hear more about that during my keynote tomorrow, but to talk about the imperative to use AI from a moral imperative perspective, but to use it well. So fundraising.ai, you can go to the website and it exists for you. We built the first framework for responsible AI that's been adopted. In fact, Virtuous, I happen to work for Virtuous now, was the first tech company that actually signed the global framework for responsible AI. But then lots of others have followed. Everyone from Microsoft to Amazon and Salesforce have all been supporting. Accordant has been supporting. Of course, DonorSearch and Evertree have been supporting fundraising AI, allowing us to literally just curate content and bring out for free. And a couple of years ago, Scott and I were like, well, we were having these like really fun conversations every day.
Sometimes fun, sometimes scary, sometimes anxiety.
Probably most of the time,
a good blend.
Fun for me, scary for you. And Scott has young kids, so sometimes I have to temper, and I'll even text him and say, here's an article, either don't read it ever, or don't read it before bed. Definitely don't read in front of your kids. So we're having these conversations and working with we started a company called Futuris Group that was doing healthcare, predictive modeling, exclusively healthcare, and then that led us to starting a DonorSearch and rebuilding what is now DonorSearch AI. And we're having these conversations, we talk like 5 times a day. We're like, why don't we just hit record one of these times? Because there's like maybe a couple good things that others might want to. And so this is now, I just hit record, episode 77 of the Fundraising AI podcast. So you are now part of our first experiment of a live podcast. Now, has anyone listened to the podcast? So,
okay.
Oh, good. Great. Okay, so it's always fun when I go. And so as it started out talking about more like tools and techniques, it's kind of devolved into like kind of philosophical and moral things of like how we're thinking about AI and the future of humanity. And that actually came as a result of most of the people listening. They were just like, we can go on YouTube and get 1 million classes on how to write a better prompt. Like, what are the bigger implications? And to be honest, it's actually more fun to talk about philosophical things. But one of those things that we talk about often, and we say this because I spent 20 years leading nonprofits, started out Boys and Girls Club, served as Associate Vice Chancellor at UC San Diego, as a CCS. Then actually started working in AI in 2017 while I was Senior Vice President at City of Hope. It's easy for Scott, and Scott actually has a background in prospect research. And
on the mission side of nonprofits and mental health, 20 years ago, started prospect research, capital campaign consulting, predictive modeling, and so on.
Yeah.
And when we used to talk about tools, like the technology would move so fast that a podcast would come out a week later after we recorded it, and it's basically outdated already.
Right.
So that's where we kind of moved into, let's talk about how organizations should be using it. We're all on the same path, but we're at all different areas on our AI journey, right? And if AI adoption was easy, every nonprofit would do it. It wouldn't need to be a conversation. It's not easy. It's not a tech problem. It's a people problem, a culture problem. So that's where we started talking about, like, or often internally, what would we do if we were starting in a nonprofit today? Whether working at a nonprofit or starting our own from scratch, how would we approach it in this AI world?
And acknowledging, it's very easy for us to say that. Like, I'm like, oh my gosh, in 2000, I took over as executive director of Local Boys and Girls Club, and I'm like, man, if I had ChatGPT today, I'd crush it. Like, I would blow everyone away. And it's easy to say that. But in real terms, as we were kind of thinking about what we would talk about today, instead of like the death of humanity, which, you know, during lunch may be a little depressing, we'd actually talk about what would it look like if we were actually running a nonprofit today. And we want to break this out in kind of two parts and dive in deep. So we're hoping that at the end of this, you actually gain some practical perspective on some kind of themes that you should be thinking about as you're even hearing Betsy, which is like, I mean, it's a whole new world, and Betsy's included AI in her opening keynote. It's amazing. So let's start there. Now, there are two different types of nonprofits. We'll just kind of categorize them loosely. There's really small and nimble nonprofits that have nothing to lose and everything to gain. And then there's, well, I mean, I don't know the word bureaucratic or slow or less nimble organizations.
More established,
mature organizations that might be represented in the room here. And the way you might think about AI in either of the scenarios might look a little bit different. So we're going to start with small, nimble organization. Now, the tools and evolution is the same, but the speed in which you can act change obviously is different. And so, Scott, why don't you talk about, because one of the fun things that we get to dream about is like, if we had a brilliant idea of saving humanity today, number one, would we start a nonprofit? And I don't know. But if we did, like, what would the philosophy be, and how would you think about that?
Yeah, well, if I was working or starting a small nonprofit, again, a lot of flexibility, right? Not a lot of resources, so I can't go out and buy custom tools, custom predictions, and so on. But fortunately, generative AI is almost free, $20 a month for licenses. So I would make sure that everybody had that tool. But I also like to think, we have a friend in our space, Dan Kershaw, who works at Furniture Bank in Canada. They have a team of like 5 people. And necessity is the mother of invention, right? They don't have those resources to bring on a marketing team, right? Or buy a predictive tool. So they have to leverage everything that's available to them. And generative AI is one of those tools. So I would make sure that everything I'm doing, I'm using AI as a thought partner. I'm not making a decision without running it by, poking holes in it, putting it into ChatGPT or whatever other tool to say, present this from 3 different lenses that I'm not thinking about, right? Everything can be done that way. I would worry less about staffing, about individuals, bringing them onto the team. I would worry about augmenting everybody, getting everybody to feel comfortable with this tool as a partner in them executing on their work, right? Also, like, just think about, what could I do differently? When we look at the for-profit sector, we're at an area now where there are almost billion-dollar companies run by 3 people because they're building it in an AI native world. They're starting from scratch with agentic AI as part of the problem, or part of the solution, rather. Part of the package.
It might be part of the problem.
It might be part of the problem.
We'll find out. Yeah. Give us a year.
But they're not starting the old school way of just even 10 years ago. So they can approach problems with a new perspective, a different perspective, and say, how would I do it if I had a team of agents next to me as opposed to a team of 15 or 20, right? Much cheaper, working all the time. And so I would want to take that viewpoint and work my way backwards of, this is now who we're competing against, right? In Generosity Crisis, you talked about how it's not just nonprofits competing against nonprofits, it's nonprofits competing against for-profits with unlimited resources. Now they have unlimited resources and unlimited bandwidth and unlimited personalization or precision. So how do we compete against that, starting with just a handful of people, but unlimited access to AI tools?
Yeah, one of the things that really, when ChatGPT, how many here use ChatGPT? Most of you probably. And then Claude, probably second, Google, Copilot, Perplexity, and kind of goes down.
Anyone using Grok?
Well, we could talk later if you're using Grok. or DeepSeek. But a friend of ours, Kaz McGrath from Australia, called, and ChatGPT came out with a $200 a month version, or $100, I can't remember what it was.
Yeah.
And it has this deep research function. It can go a lot deeper. And she calls and she goes, you know, the day it came out, she goes, I just asked Deep Research to create me a business plan for a nonprofit that raises $1 billion a year with 6 employees or less. And guess what it did? It gave her a 60-page business plan that is pretty plausible today. And so the limitation, and we really believe this, the greatest limitation for leaders today is thinking that the future looks like an optimized version of today. And it just looks like an incremental improvement. We're setting our goals based on 1 or 2 or 3% increases, while the rest of the world is like, why does this work even have to be done this way? And, you know, at Virtuous, it's interesting because AI adoption is a minimum requirement. We expect every single person to be using AI for everything. And so it's not about adoption, it's about how you evolve and question, how does this work get done from the very beginning? And so for small nonprofits, and I get this, they don't have a lot of bureaucracy. They don't have 100 people in IT telling them, oh, you can't download that thing. But there are a lot of things that are in your control. I spent most of my career in enterprise size nonprofits, and I learned at UC San Diego. One is my vice chancellor that hired me told me, many of you probably follow the same, never ask for permission, always ask for forgiveness. So that was number one, because he spent 23 years in the UC system and said, if he ever had to wait for permission, he'd never get anything done. So that was actually helpful. I was grateful for him as a mentor. But it was really this sense of being willing to like try new things and figure out how to do that. Now, it looks different in big organizations because you have to build stakeholder buy-in and all these. Now, things we're going to talk about today are not rocket science. Some of these tools cost money, but a lot of this really comes down to a cultural adaptation or orientation. And then which is the biggest piece. And Scott and I, we've implemented custom AI solutions at a few hundred enterprise-sized nonprofits and realized that half of them succeeded and half of them nothing changed. It had nothing to do with data or models, it had everything to do with people and culture. So the culture part cannot be overstated. It is like the most important thing, bar none. The second is the operational side, because if you just create this incredible culture of curiosity where everybody's questioning everything, but you have no way to operationalize it or systematize it, you're not going to get very far. It's just going to be a lot of chaos. And then the third part is technical. And we put that third because if you don't have those other two elements, it doesn't matter how much money you spend. It doesn't matter if you spend more money than the other person. Nothing will change in your organization. So it's really important to think about those three domains, the cultural, the operational, and the technical side of these. So what do you want to add before we jump in?
Yeah, and a lot of what we see is organizations think that AI adoption just equals buying a tool, right? If I buy a tool, I'm going to be good. I solved the problem. I checked off that box. I'm ready to go. But then they don't see success coming out of it and they blame the tool. But it's not that. So that's why we put the tech side at the back, right? There's going to be unlimited tools, new products coming out all the time. But if you don't have the people aligned, if you don't have the processes aligned, you're never going to be able to find that success coming out of whatever tool you decide to purchase.
Yeah. So, and we're just big believers that this is not a tool or an adoption issue. And Cindy said, this is basically, or Betsy said, I'm not sure. I think you both said it's a new operating system. Mm-hmm. It's an evolution to how we think about how work gets done in the first place. So that really, really changed that, because there's about 200 million YouTube videos that will tell you otherwise. About 200 million AI experts that are all going to tell you that you need to learn how to write a better prompt. And there's nothing further from the truth. In fact, when Wiley asked if I'd write a book on AI, my first question was like, why? Because like, wouldn't someone just go into AI and say, how do I use you to help me with my job? And they're like, well, I mean, some people need to read a book. And I'm like, whatever. And so we wrote a book. And to be honest, that book took 4.5 months to write versus 2 years that it took me to write Generosity Crisis, because we had access to the world's knowledge and all types of ideas. So all that to say is you have lots of power and lots of agency to do these. Okay, so as far as more mature organizations go, like, I want to say, I get it. It's daunting. And like, for every time you get a yes, there's like 10 no's to get to that yes, to get something done. But there is a sense of urgency right now. It's palpable that you feel like the world is moving forward and our sector is kind of running a little bit slower maybe. So your leaders are hearing this too. And we'll get calls from like, my leader told me that we have to use AI, like, but what is AI? Like, what do we actually need to know about this? So as we're thinking about from a cultural perspective, we have to stop limiting our belief based on what has been done in the past. It's the hardest thing to do. If I grab 100 people in a room and I say, imagine a future where everything goes right with AI, and work in a huddle with some people and come back to me in a few minutes and say, like, everything went right 5 years, 10 years from now. What's amazing is that humans come back with a optimized version of today, like almost inevitably. I've done this with like 1,000 people. They come back and be like, oh, it looks just like an incremental version of today because that's predictable. Now, AI represents a completely new kind of paradigm where intelligence is now democratized. If you were the smart person that succeeded because you were smart, you're kind of screwed in the future. Like, I mean, in all reality, I have a son who's basically, my son is very, very smart. He's not very adaptable. He's a little bit on the spectrum. And I've had some really strong conversations with him as a parent. I'm like, it is not okay. I mean, he graduated perfect GPA in 3 years from his undergrad, his master's in 1 year, got hired by Amazon 2 weeks out of school. It's not okay just to be smart. Intelligence is a commodity. It's not okay just to be a person that has single subject domain expertise. You need to be the person that is really good at connecting dots and is good at 6 or 8 things together. So that goes from a cultural perspective of looking at the positions that you're hiring for and the positions that you've hired recently. What skill set did you hire for? A subject matter expertise, like someone who's just the best plan giving person you could find or the best major gift person that you can find? Or did you hire someone that was insatiably curious, that was able to connect dots and be like the master puzzle builder within your organization? Not surprising, Scott and I have actually done AI readiness surveys with organizations and hospitals, and we've come back without telling them. Would they engage us to do the survey? This one we did about a year and a half ago. And we didn't tell them that we were going to look at all their open positions. And not one of their open positions out of 12 that they were hiring for even mentioned AI fluency as an expectation. Except there was an hourly position that was an executive assistant, right? Yeah. Which they thought was appropriate. And when we talked to the chief development officer, she's like, oh, crap. Like, that's like, if you want to look at the future of your organization, look at who you're hiring today. So when we're talking about this, do not let what the constraints of the past dictate the future that you're going to, derive in your organization. So one of the things, in fact, a CDO who used to work for me at City of Hope, she came to me and she's like, hey, can you look at our operational plan and our campaign strategy and let me know what I missed? And she had created this fundraising campaign strategy that had a 1-to-1 ratio for how much money they wanted to raise to how many new FTEs they were going to hire. And it was very traditional. I was at CCS. It would have been the very traditional path of like, you're going to raise $100 million. You need to hire 14 people and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, what if that wasn't true? What if staff growth didn't equal scale any longer? What if instead of hiring 14 people, you hired 7 people, but you hired the right 7 people and empowered everyone in your organization today to leverage AI to the greatest extent possible? So really start to rethink, like, what got us here will not get us there. We know that we have challenges and headwinds and all the things in our sector. And it's an incredible opportunity from a cultural perspective to create this sense of curiosity. Just because it worked in the past, it doesn't mean it's going to work in the future. There's other things that we think about from a cultural perspective. Number one is, again, AI adoption is a minimum expectation. Every single person, all the way to the top, all the way to the bottom, is expected to be curious about what tools exist that can help amplify my effort. Now, I get it. There's not always, you can't use unlimited number of tools. Really fortunate, virtuous, because we're just like, our founder is a tinkerer. I haven't been on a call with him in months where he's not like, I played with this thing at 2 a.m. last night. I mean, Jason knows it's amazing because then it just keeps us all in this rhythm of like trying experimenting. A lot of you get fired if you did that. But follow the rules and then push the limits. This is not a tool that just helps you write a letter faster. It's a tool that lets you help reimagine the pain points of your job and 10 other ways to achieve something. Think about this though also. So one of the things that Scott and I have advised on is that if AI is an IT function in your organization, how many of it is kind of directed by IT in your organizations? So only one. Okay, this is actually a good thing because in many organizations that we talk to, it's like IT is like can't, start and stop. But at the end of the day, this becomes, again, a cultural foundation of how you think. So to find a person in your organization that is kind of like the AI cheerleader, they're a little bit weird and wonky and they think about things. They're like the disruptive thinker that is like exciting and also kind of annoying because they're coming at things. So embrace that person, deputize that person in your organization and be like, start a multi-stakeholder user group. Because we've learned that organizations really thrive when they learn internally. They learn from each other. So how do you experiment, how do different people experiment internally and then share what's working and what's not working. Scott and I've seen a lot of examples of leaders that are not technologists. Many of the leaders that we've talked to are not technologists, but they're creating the space for experimentation. They're creating kind of philanthropic R&D labs within their organization to be like, to reward the creative risk takers. And one CDO that we talked to at another children's hospital, she created failure days. And she realized that failure days were basically served the same purpose as like, as long as she could bring people together in the safe space to like experiment and try things, like what's not working? Well, what she found was someone would say, well, that's not working, so I tried another way. Or another person said, oh, I had that same issue, but I came up around it this other way. I reverse engineered it. Or something just didn't work and you just saved a lot of people a lot of time. And so all that to say is the cultural foundation needs to come from the top, and it really, and most of you are leaders, or everyone's a leader in this room, have an outsized influence in what that culture looks like and whether that culture rewards questions more than answers. Now, this is like built into us because at UCSD, I was kind of a tyrant. Like, I don't think there's any former employees of mine, but like I was extremely KPI driven. My entire wall behind my desk was literally like dashboards that I created, and we predicted revenue based on everything down to like every text message and phone call. And I thought question askers were annoying. Like I honestly, now there are annoying people that just like to ask questions. If you're one of those, stop it, because like no one like that wants a person just ask the question because they want to hear themselves. But if you're a person that asks question because you're seeking a new way, like do that and reward that around your organization. But that's fundamentally different than how I led for 20 years. I mean, it's a real big mindset shift to be like, oh yeah, that disruptive thinker, it's because they're extracting themselves from the organization and all the barriers of what can't be, or the things we tried in the past or that we did and didn't work. And they're looking at things objectively and saying, hey, why don't we approach something differently? So reward that part. And you'll hear more tomorrow, so I don't have to get in this. Truly, I believe that the greatest unlock is how you create a culture of curiosity within your organization. And we just did a AI readiness survey at Virtuous, which will be released next week. It showed that AI adoption's at 92% in the nonprofit sector right now. Of the 340 organizations that responded, 92%, but only 7% are finding meaningful or significant advantages out of AI. So then it becomes a question, what are the 7% doing that works really well? The first thing they do is they create that safe space for people to think about things in a new way. So why don't you guide us into the operational side?
Yeah, so once you have that safe space, once everybody feels comfortable with the tools, you could have a whole team of AI super users, but if they aren't working strategically, working together, it's going to be like herding AI cat, right? So you want to make sure that they all have the same crafting outputs or crafting prompts the same way. They have access to prompt libraries with approved content, approved instructions. So that way the marketing team is coming up with stories and images in line with what the direct mail team is putting out in their materials, right? You want it to be cohesive across the organization. And so it's not just about getting everybody up and ready and excited to use the tools, but it's making sure that you're working towards the same end goal together. You also want to audit everything you're doing, right? If you don't measure the whole KPI thing, that which gets counted counts, right?
Yeah.
If you're not measuring what you're doing or how long it takes to do a task or how many tasks you do regularly, you'll never know if AI has been more efficient or helped you save time, right? It'll be that anecdotal, oh yeah, I got an email out 7 minutes quicker than I did without using AI. You want to track for about a week, 2 weeks, write down everything, be diligent, be annoying with it, right? So that way you can measure it afterwards. You're not going to want to boil the ocean. You're going to want to start small. I talk about this in my session later on today, but start with one thing. You can't multitask with this. Start with one objective. See how it can help you iterate just a little bit better, make it a little bit more efficient. Think of different ways to approach the problem with a unique perspective, right? You're also going to want to build governance and acceptable policies. We've seen this so many times. Who here has governance policies for their organization? AI governance policies. Okay.
About 43% of organizations, as of our study will show, have one. But I find it actually surprising it was that high, because when I do this informal survey, it's usually around 5 or 10%.
And there might be policies, but it just hasn't been spread out to everybody, right? Again, it usually falls under an IT function. So they might have a policy, but nobody else knows about it. So you basically don't have one. But what we find is that if you don't have an AI policy, there's a whole side of individuals that are just using it however they want, willy-nilly. That's a little bit risky. But almost just as risky are the people who aren't going to use it at all because they're afraid to make a mistake, right? They aren't moving any further ahead, any further along. They're avoiding it altogether because they don't have policies, procedures, or acceptable use cases that they can tack on and try to move a little bit further down the road. So you want to get something up and running. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it has to be something. The name of the game with AI is iterate, right? Technology is moving so fast. There's going to be things that you could do in a month from now that you can't do now. So be flexible, be nimble with that. But build out a policy right now that you can go back and approve and review with that committee to make sure you're getting all those perspectives across the team.
And I'll add, if you're a leader and you don't have an acceptable use policy and an AI governance policy, you have people in your team using AI and they're afraid of losing their jobs. They're afraid of creating reputational harm. And we know this because we've interviewed a lot of fundraisers who've shared this. And then we've gone back to the CDO and like, do you know that you have a significant number of people are afraid of getting fired? And the CDO would be like, oh my gosh, I never intended for that. That's not the culture I'm trying to create in my organization. But by nature of not having those guidelines, that's the sense that a lot of employees are operating under. So just so you're aware, that is happening. I mean, whether or not you have a governance policy, 92% of your employees are using AI. And if it's underneath their desk and they're like this and looking over their shoulder, that's the difference between having AI governance and acceptable use.
Yeah. I would also worry less about the tools, right? The tools come after. Again, you need to figure out the culture. You need to figure out the processes. Tools are going to come and go. You don't get points or extra credit for using all the tools that are out there. You get points and credit for being more efficient for your work, right? People often ask us, are you switching to Claude yet? Or are you going to Grok or anything? Like, find what works for you, right? Use Claude more than I do. I use Perplexity more than you do, right? I know what works for me. And for me to start with a brand new tool is going to put me back 20 steps. So find one thing that works for you and just lean into it as much as possible. It doesn't have to be everything. It doesn't have to be the most exciting technology, but use something that allows you to move a little bit further down the road.
I think the other thing that Scott and I hear a lot, if you're just going to use AI for AI's sake, it's just going to be directionless. But if you follow what the private sector is doing right now is setting up significant, like very specific goals on how much staff time you're trying to save. So I was with the chief AI officer at Royal Bank of Canada. He's the number 2 person at Royal Bank of Canada now, reporting directly to the CEO. And his mandate as a professional at their organization is to double their workforce without hiring a single employee. I mean, if you think about this, so the gain that they're trying to, like literally every financial institution, by the way, is an AI first institution now. So Morgan Stanley, JP Morgan, they're all following the same thing. So, Scott and I were talking, if you set a goal in your organization to save 20% of staff time, and we're not talking about taking the things away from you that you love. Like we're always like perplexed at this idea of people like, I love writing and I don't want to use AI for writing. I'm like, well, then don't use it for writing. Like, do you love math? No, I hate math. Well, use it for math. And so don't let it rob you from the things that bring you joy, obviously. But I think it's important to set a goal. Now, this is to extreme measures where like the CEO of Shopify basically has created a manifesto. It's very famous online. You can find it. And he basically said in this manifesto 6 months ago saying, I will not approve another FTE unless it can be proven that that job can't be done by AI. I will not approve increased budget expenditures unless it can't be proven that it can't be done by AI. That is the essence that we're thinking about. And that's the delta from organizations that really thrive or fail. Now, in our sector, one of the things that we hear a lot from individuals is saying, well, does that just mean I'm going to be expected to do more? And burnout's at an all-time high. So we've got like 18-month turnover. And if you just basically tell every fundraiser, I want you to save 20% of every employee in your organization, save 20% of your time so you could do 20% more bad fundraising, that will lead to burnout 20% faster. And so the real trick here is because the lure to do more, and we have this saying that we use a lot on the podcast, which is if you have a broken practice and you put something digital on top of it, you have a digital broken practice. You're going to amplify all the bad things within your organizations, and donors are going to feel even more like ATMs and all the things that we warn against. But if you, as a leader, safeguarded that aspect, the human, the essence, the sanctity of fundraising, and you said, our goal in our organization is to increase our efficiency by 20%. If you stop to think about that for 1 second, a 20% gain and as a stated goal from an operational perspective, like everyone knows, our goal is to use AI wisely to save 20% of our time on the mundane things, the boring things, the things that nobody likes to do anyway, the things they procrastinate on, but then to take that 20% of time and reserve it for inherently human things. How transformative would it be if you had an extra day a week? 20%. An extra day a week for you to do inherently human things. To call the donor that you've been thinking about, like in the shower or at night, not in a bad way in the shower, that's weird. And like, that was a bad example, retract. But in like thinking of like, oh, I should have checked on their, I know they had a grandkid and I wanted to say hi and or like, you know what, we've been meaning to have lunch, we didn't. If you had an extra day a week, a 20% gain, because you offloaded the crap work that you didn't like to do anyway, but as a stated goal, if everyone in your organization could do that, truly everyone becomes a fundraiser. Everyone becomes part of the donor journey. Everyone is empowered at that time to take that day a week to write a note, to call, to text or whatever. Like raise your hand if that would be transformative in your organization.
Yeah.
Like
how much more rewarding would that be?
Oh my gosh.
Right?
Yeah. And from a burnout perspective, I mean, it gets you back to center of the things that you truly love about the job to begin with.
Yeah. And then lastly, we still want to cover something else. Lunch and learns, right? There's someone in your organization who's a little bit further ahead than everyone else, that everyone else can learn from, but focus less on the output, focus less on what they created, focus more on how they got there. Because they also made mistakes, right? They didn't just come up with one prompt and they came out with something perfect. They went through their own iterations, but if you don't highlight that, then everyone who's falling a little bit behind is be like, well, I'm never going to be able to get there, right? You need to show the flaws, you need to show the mistakes, show those failures so that everybody feels, again, that psychological safety, that it's okay to try something new as long as we're working again towards that end goal.
Yeah. So the last part is the technical side, and everything we've shared with you. Yeah, there's the philosophical side of like being open to questioning everything and recognizing that the way you've done things is not the best or only way. That just has to be the essence of how we live it today. The second is to operationalize that and build structure around it so it's repeatable. The third part is technical, because there's zero chance, I can tell you, that Scott and I would go work at any of your organizations and not demand budget dollars for specific things that would allow us to do those other two things. Mm-hmm. And so I know bias on this, but as you should be, because you're paid to do this. We've been at the forefront of predictive AI since the beginning, because we realized very early on in 2017, when we started working in AI, it didn't matter how much you asked, when you asked, what purpose and what way, if it wasn't the right person to begin with. And predictive AI uncovered basically similarities of individuals that we could, at City of Hope, we had 2 million patient visits a year, 2% of those patients ever made a gift. And we were able to correlate the similarities that the 2% had. So I don't know. Yeah, there'd be zero. That'd probably be the first thing that we do in any organization.
Yeah, I mean, I love data. Debbie, I know you love data, but if you locked us in a room with someone's database for a week, we could not tell you the people that you need to prioritize. Right? We're going to focus on the same people over and over again because we can only manage 20 data points, right? 150 names. AI can make those decisions for us and AI can prioritize that, but AI is not going to establish and foster and steward that relationship. So that's where we want to keep it informational, not relational. We want to have it sift through data, find those patterns, but we have that human-to-human connection, right? And that's where, again, at DSAI and our donor search and EverTrue, we're surfacing all your data to make sure that you're finding the right people to talk to them at the right time and then giving you the tools to do the outreach so you could just focus on the relationship, not all the menial steps to get to that relationship.
The second part would be to actually focus on the donor journey. So the CRMs are traditionally built to store your data in a safe and secure place, but not necessarily created to take action with human in the loop. And that's where Virtuous is the reason I left Donor Search to go to Virtuous, because they had a different belief that every person should be treated differently based on those insights, and you could automate that. So understanding predictive AI and machine learning, deep learning to understand who your donors are, but then looking at a product like Virtuous that actually automates the donor journey and actually can create hundreds of paths for every type of donor you might have in a highly prescribed way. We also have products like Momentum that puts basically communication to your inbox. And this is not a sales pitch for Virtuous or Momentum, but you should check them out if any of this sounds interesting to you. The other is look for tools like that. Someone brought up the other day, it's like, too bad there's not a Duolingo for fundraisers, like how to teach fundraisers, like how to practice being a fundraiser in the privacy of your own home. And one of our friends, Mallory Erickson, she was a fundraiser that burned out basically and studied the brain science of fundraising in Berkeley. created a platform called Practivated, which does that and amplifies work that like a coordinate is doing with you and just gives you more of that interactive one-on-one. So we would be looking at like prioritizing tools that made that job just that much better.
And she is not a technologist.
No.
Right? Far from it. But she created an AI platform that, again, coaches individuals through these asks. So anything is possible, right? But you need to be focused on what you want to do and not just, again, boil the ocean or try everything just because it's available.
Yeah. So again, going back, just separating basically your success in AI in the future. AI is inevitable, but how you use it is not, right? There'll be organizations that lean in and do these things and they will take off. And we've already seen this in the private sector. We'll see this in the nonprofit sector. The digital divide that we've always known will be the digital chasm between those that do and those that just kind of wait and see. I wrote an article that later is probably the most dangerous word a nonprofit leader can use today. Like I'll get to it later. The other is I wanted to recognize, so there's the cultural, the operational, and the technical side. You've got to think in all of those domains to be successful. But the last thing that we would just want to end on is AI fatigue. About 3 or 4 years ago, we were talking about this idea that there'll be a day when you hear the words AI or artificial intelligence and it will make you want to vomit. Not because it's scary, because it's just so much. It's just like too much. And I got a call a week ago from a conference organizer saying, hey, is there any way, it was actually a conference of foundations. So all foundations come together and they learn. And she's like, would you do the keynote at our conference? I'm like, total honor. I'd happy to do it. She's like, can you do your presentation without mentioning the words artificial intelligence? And to be honest, I understood the sentiment. Like the sentiment is that fatigue is real because AI is everything and nothing at the same time. And I get it. But it also means if we're not using the words, it doesn't change the fact that the impact that AI will make on everything in humanity, in society, in our family dynamics, and social fabric, in our organizations will be any less. Mm-hmm. So acknowledging that AI fatigue is important, but just pretending that it doesn't exist will not serve you well in the future. I wrote an article about it 2 days ago. It's called AI fatigue something. You can find it on LinkedIn or Substack. And so I just want to acknowledge that because you're not in rare company if you're just like, it's just a lot. Like it's so much. And I just want to tune it all out. Like, if I could uninvent one invention, it would be the internet. Because I want to go back to I don't even know what we did pre-internet, honestly. I can't even remember. Yeah, books. So I get it, but it is the world that we live in. And I think from a moral imperative, our organizations deserve the very best. The very best is not doing it the way we've always done it. The very best is thinking about new and creative ways to amplify the impact of what we all do. So thus concludes our very first live podcast of the Fundraising AI episode, or whatever it's called. And thank you so much for all the work that you do. As people that come as fundraisers, as that primary orientation, we send you love, we channel empathy through you and for you, and we know that you're fighting the good fight. The fact that you're all here, again, leaning in this conference is amazing. So anything that we can do to support your work, let us know. This is what we're here for, to help each other through this journey. Thank you.
Thanks, Will.